Should we be moral fundamentalists or moral relativists? Hi, I'm Mike Mason. This is St. Joe Society podcast. The St. Joe Society is a Catholic lay apostolate devoted to help men order all things to Christ by growing strong in mind, body, and spirit. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can check us out online at stjosephsociety.org. This is the Intro to Moral Theology, Episode 3. All right, fellas, the question before us today is, should we be moral fundamentalists or moral rationalists? And the answer is going to be neither, okay? So we'll get to here in a second. But before we jump into that, let's look at what we did last week. Last week, we looked at the theme of exitus and reditus as being fundamental to theology as a whole. And if you guys recall, the theme of exitus and reditus is that we proceed from God in order to reditus, return to him. And this exitus and reditus theme is throughout all of theology. In fact, of all of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae is centered around this theme, okay? Second, I also introduced you guys to the four primary elements of Thomistic moral theology, since we're going to focus on his take on things. The first was that the moral life is all about being happy. Second, God gives us things on the inside, like virtues and gifts, in order to help us live moral lives. He gives us help on the outside, like the laws, moral laws and moral precepts and grace to help us live moral lives. These come from outside of us to equip us. And then once we have all those in place, we actually have to make good choices, which is called prudential judgment. And those are really the four elements of his moral theology. So as we're studying it, we're going to break down all moral theology into those four. And then as the months and years pass and we keep doing more of these classes together, we'll deepen our understanding of them so that we can live good and holy lives. So that was last week. This week, we're going to discuss the sources of moral theology, okay? As we look at the source of moral theology, this is also going to give us insight into the relationship between ethics and moral theology, because they're not the same, okay? Those are distinct approaches. I've taken moral philosophy classes in my education. I've also taken moral theology. The approach is distinct, but you guys understand those, what's distinctive about each here in a minute. We're also going to talk from a practical perspective as we're trying to live moral lives, we need to know where we get our information from so that we can make good choices. So that's the plan of attack for today. Let's go ahead and jump in with our two primary sources of moral theology. So when you do moral theology, when we're thinking about what are our sources of our information, okay, we have two basic sources. First is faith. Second is reason. So faith and reason are the two sources that we appeal to do moral theology. Now, under the auspices of faith, you have sacred scripture, which is the scriptures, sacred tradition, and the teaching of the magistery of the church. Okay, so from a faith perspective, you have scripture and tradition and the church, which will give us insight into the moral life. We also have reason, so we can appeal to faith and to reason. In reason, you have relevant human sciences, so we can study things like psychology. I've read books in the past on psychology to help me understand the moral life better. So psychology can give us insights into the human person, to help coach them and lead them how to live good moral lives and become happy. You can look at sociology, economics, stuff like that as well. One of the primary things we're going to discuss a great deal is human reason as in philosophy, which I'm going to return to here in a second. Okay. So from a moral theology perspective, you have the information we get from faith, sacred scripture, tradition, the magisterium. You also have relevant human sciences, psychology, sociology, and economics, and then also philosophy, which we'll spend a good deal of time on. Now, before we launch in, because I want to look a little bit deeper into both the role of reason and faith here, I do want to show that this is the point in which moral theology and ethics depart, okay? So moral theology and ethics, they both study human conduct and they judge the rightness and wrongness of each, okay? That's what they have in common. The difference between ethics and moral theology is the method they pursue in their conclusions to arrive at their conclusions and the sources they appeal to. So when I took moral philosophy in grad school, it's my first master's degree in philosophy. When I took moral philosophy, when I wrote papers, my arguments had to be made from reason and reason alone. Okay. I couldn't, part of my premises, the things I was using to prove points, couldn't be from divine revelation, because in ethics or moral philosophy, those are used synonymously, you must only appeal to reason. Okay. Moral theology, you appeal to reason. Okay. So you're still gonna harvest all those good ideas that reason offers, but you also can appeal to scripture. So I took my moral theology class. I could reference the Bible, church documents, all that sort of stuff. Okay. That is the main difference between ethics and moral theology. The reason why this is important, and I'll return to this at the end before we close, when you're talking to people about morality, you need to keep this distinction in mind. If you're talking to someone about morality and they are a Christian, okay, more specifically, if they are a Catholic, then they will find things taught in faith relevant. So when you're arguing with someone on a moral point or trying to explain a moral point, if they're a Christian, you can appeal to scripture, tradition, magisterium, okay? And that'll be effective. You can also appeal to reason because they're rational too. If you're talking to someone about a political issue and a moral issue and they are not a Christian, they do not accept the authority of the Bible, the church, tradition, then you have to appeal primarily to reason. Okay. So understanding this distinction is really, really important because depending on who you're talking to, this will help you understand how you can talk to them. So if you're talking to somebody about, say, a moral issue like abortion, well, if you're talking to someone who isn't Christian, then you should just, what's going to be most persuasive for them is just appealing to what reason says about that. Okay. What psychology, sociology, economics, philosophy says about abortion. If you're appealing to a Christian, you can go to the scriptures as well. So it's an important distinction to keep in mind, especially when you're talking to other people. Okay. Now, let's look at the role of reason and faith with a little bit more depth. Okay. When we use reason, I'm going to appeal to things as we do this study that you find in psychology, sociology, economics. Okay. I will make appeals to those things. When I put St. Joe's Society together and was studying kind of how to help men grow spiritually, I appealed to a lot of information I got from psychological studies on how habit formation works. I would look at sports psychology stuff, like how do you get guys to achieve goals that are difficult. I work through those things to help me design St. Joe's Society, and that's how to teach it well. So I will appeal to that stuff. But principally, when I appeal to reason, we're principally talking about the role of philosophy. Okay. Now, what is philosophy? Philosophy is literally the love of wisdom. Okay, which frankly doesn't tell us a whole bunch. But what philosophy is it's the science in which natural reason, this is reason's own ability to do this, okay, apart from divine revelation. Okay, we're not talking about scripture or any of that stuff. It's the ability of natural reason to understand things and their first causes, okay? What do I mean by that? This is the mind's ability to think about the most fundamental and important topics, okay? So take something like this. So physics studies changing and moving objects, okay? When you do physics, what you don't ask is what's the nature of change itself? Okay, you don't ask that in a physics class. Change is assumed, like, well, things change, that's it. And then you just do your physics. What philosophy does is it takes a step back to a more fundamental question. It says, well, what is the nature of change itself? Okay, that would be a question to study in philosophy under a class called metaphysics, okay, which class I took. What is the nature of change itself? Notice the physics class, you just assume change. The metaphysics class, you discuss what is change. Philosophy wants to get those root principles, okay? When we talked about those three postulates of ethics, when I mentioned those, the existence of God, the freedom of the will, immortality of the soul, for Thomas Aquinas, those things that we assume in moral theology are proven in what is called natural theology or metaphysics, okay? So what philosophy does is it examines the groundwork, the most fundamental questions of thought. So philosophy has a massive impact on our moral theology. Because if you're a Kantian philosophically, Kant, we talked about the duty of obligation. If that's the philosophy you follow, it changes how you read the Bible. If you follow Thomas Aquinas' approach to philosophy, it changes the way you read the Bible. So the role of reason is to really, especially philosophies, to look at those fundamental precepts. And I'm going to help you guys navigate those things. Okay. So part of the reason why we're going to, walk through this material together is hopefully I'll shed some light on these philosophical presuppositions in a way that, you guys will find helpful. And then you'll start growing in wisdom on how this stuff works. Okay. So that's philosophy and how its role is. And again, it's easier to just do it than define it in a weird sense. Okay. It's kind of hard to describe what philosophy is. It's kind of more clear to do it, which is kind of ironic. So that's the role of reason. Okay. What's the role of faith? The church teaches that reason can tell us things that are true about God, about the human condition, about morality, about all kinds of stuff. So reason has power to do a lot of stuff. So we just, with our own power of our minds, can do a lot. There are things we cannot know by reason. Okay. This is where faith comes in. Faith is when an authority, whether that be God or Jesus or the church, tells you things that are true that you can't know without them. Or sometimes God tells us things that are true that we can know without him, but they're really difficult to figure out. So he just tells us the answer. So what faith does is it gives us an inside view about God, about ourselves and our condition and the world around us. It's kind of like getting the answers for the test in the beginning to help keep us on track. So the role that faith plays, okay, is that God gives us an inside view into what's going on. Okay. God's the primary reason why we believe what we believe by faith, because God can't lie. He's perfectly good and all knowing and all that stuff. And then the things he reveals it through, like the scriptures, tradition, and the church, God's authority guarantees those things are without error. Okay. So the way faith and reason works in morality is what we're going to do is as we do our morality, as we discuss these things, we're going to say, okay, what does reason tell us? What's my mind telling me about rightness and wrongness of stuff? Take getting drunk for an example. You don't need the Bible to tell you that getting drunk's bad for you. Okay. Anyone who's gotten drunk before wakes up the next morning and goes, that wasn't good for me. Okay. So you don't need the Bible to do that. Now reason can tell you a whole bunch about drunkenness. Now God will come in and say, hey, drunkenness is not only bad for you, it's also a mortal sin. Okay. Once that comes in, we have more information about drunkenness than we had before. So reason tells us it's a bad choice to make. This concept of mortal sin, God comes and says, no, it's actually even worse than you guys know. Okay. That's how faith and reason work together, is where we can know a lot about the moral and good life with reason alone, but faith's going to supplement that and clarify it. And what faith can do for reason is when we make mistakes in our reason, faith can correct them. So if you guys, maybe it's new, maybe you didn't know that getting drunk is a mortal sin. Well, now you do, because faith told you that. So we can say, well, getting drunk's not a good idea, but God comes and goes, not only is it not a good idea, it's a mortal sin. So it can correct errors we make in reason. Okay. Also, what reason can do to faith is sometimes when we read the scriptures, we understand them incorrectly. Okay. That happens. I'm not saying the scriptures are wrong. Scriptures are never wrong. Okay. They're inerrant. They don't make any errors, but our understanding of them can be wrong. What reason can do is also help clarify what's in divine faith. Okay. In the divine revelation. So that's how these two things work together. So practically speaking, when we're talking about the spiritual life moving forward, I'm going to appeal to philosophy, and it'll be evident when I do so. Okay. I'm going to appeal to natural sciences like psychology and biology and stuff like that on some topics. That's reason. I'll also appeal to the scriptures, tradition, and church teaching. And when we bring these two streams together, that's going to help us grow in wisdom, understand the nature of the good life, and how to live it well. So that's what we're going to do. So those are the sources. And that's why moral theology, for my money, it's one of the most exciting topics, because as you unpack this, it's not only super profound stuff, but it's just going to help you live a life worth living. Okay. It's going to lead you down a path to eternal happiness that you definitely won't regret. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. Really good topic, definitely worth meditating upon. I look forward to you guys when you meet with your group this week in your this month or your chapter meeting, to discussing these important points. But we'll stop there because that's quite enough for 1 week. So hope you guys have a blessed week. See you next time.